There's a growing concern and awareness about the need for resilience. The rising incidence and severity of weather is just one of those reasons why the old systems don't seem to be adequate. As Jerry talked about, the issue of context is so important. Much of our work basically assumes that context is static, that development is about creating change in a context that does not change. And for a lot of cases, context that doesn't change from place to place either. What we know is that context differs everywhere. Every context is unique, and more, given the kind of changes that we see here, natural, weather-related, risks associated with terrorism, epidemics and pandemics and so on, context is changing and is very dynamic. So that requires a new framework. And resilience replaces the idea of static context with changing dynamics. We know that we have a long ways to go in understanding resilience. Some of the things that we do know is that resilience is a local issue. Because of the unique context, the role of local knowledge and institutions, cultures, and so on, resilience must be focused on at least the regional level, if not the community level. In the U.S., many of our agencies have begun the process of reshaping their priorities and their tools in this concept of local and community resilience. Departments of Health and Human Services, Homeland Security. Homeland Security has taken up this concept of resilience in a very systemic way. Economic Development Administration, the idea that development cannot be understood without understanding the changing context. Small Business Administration. But it's also true at the international level. The United Nations has developed a resilience strategy for disaster response and reduction. The OECD has developed a whole suite of resilience tools. The World Bank's Building Resilience is another example. All of these serve as resources for us as we think about the context, such as the climate change and the pandemics and epidemics. So resilience, what is it? How is it different from the standard tools that we are used to using? It's defined in a number of ways, but basically it's the ability of individuals, families, communities, regions to utilize their available resources, and keep in mind those available resources must be developed and planned, the capacity that we heard about, in order to avoid, prepare for, withstand, respond to, and recover from. Those 5 different dimensions of resilience in a way that we can respond to disasters and various types of adverse conditions. So, whereas the goal of economic development has traditionally been to create jobs, create income, increase productivity, the goal of resilience is to minimize long-term costs. And here it's important to keep in mind that we are defining costs very, very broadly, human, social, and environmental costs included. And this implies a number of new ways of new dimensions that we add to our calculus, including minimizing the damage of these changes, minimizing our necessary response to things that Brady talked about, to reduce the consequences in terms of individual and public wealth, and importantly, to shorten the period of disruption in the services and the economic productivity of these regions. Each of these things contribute to bringing about a post-disaster situation where the community and the region is in much better condition. So, new tools that need to be added to our toolbox in order to be able to do this, in addition to the traditional understanding the necessary infrastructure in a more static context, we have to understand local and regional risk, how it differs from place to place and over time, how it changes into the future as we become a part of a future that is very different from the past. We have to have knowledge of our human and infrastructure capacities, and importantly, their vulnerabilities, a new dimension, the vulnerability as well as capacity. We need to have knowledge of the economic linkages in the local and regional economy, because we know that changes, disasters that might affect the water and a part of an economy will have these ripple effects through the economy, up and down the supply chains. We need knowledge of the location, the nature of key assets and inventories, that's physical, financial, human, social, political, institutional assets. And importantly, we need to understand the behavior of people. How will people change and how will they respond to these new conditions? And much of this is very, it's almost like a guess. I mean, it's interesting that our climate change models are looking at, for the most part, the consequences of human-caused changes in carbon and so on. The one dimension that they really have is human behavior. They don't understand the feedback loops and how people respond to these changes. Resources that we are familiar with, but we may not have thought of how to put them together in the same way. We need financial resources in place, in advance, sufficient to mobilize an adequate response. Otherwise, the opportunity cost, the cost is too high. We need inventories of critical material. We need human resources, capacity in the form of emergency response. And very importantly, we need to combine that with the risk assessment so that we understand the likelihood that certain resources will be needed in a particular time frame. Otherwise, the cost of having massive inventories and response is too high. The opportunity cost means that we will lose in some other aspect. And so that is my presentation, and I look forward to questions and